What's up guys, I'm Hiro and today I'm bringing you my first tier list / guide, and this guide is going to be for the Imagines of the Frost Mage class and only the Frost Mage class. So yeah, enjoy the guide. But before we jump into the tier list / guide, I really want to make something clear, and that is that because Imagines are target farmed and are not randomly obtained for the most part, and you're farming the materials, you should not randomly make any Imagines. You should really just go for the ones that are really good for your specific class, or for, like, if you want to play multiple classes, then look out for a multi-class tier list from me in the future. But most of the time, if you're like swapping in your main stat, which is what you should be doing, as I outlined in my other video, then you want like the main stat Imagine, for example. And while I do rank some of these Imagines here as like viable options, if you have them laying around, they are going to perform, for the most part, much worse than the actual Imagines you should be going for, because you can only go for 2 Imagines. You don't really have that much choice. They're like mostly for each of these classes. There are 2 goals you can go for and 2 purples you can go for. This is pretty much as simple as it gets for the choice, and you can just look at the list, and I will give you a lot of info also about the other Imagines, so we can also learn something. But in the end, you should only be going for the best in-slot Imagines for any spec that you seriously want to play. Now jumping in, the first spec that I want to cover is the Icicle spec. If you want Imagines for the Ray spec, just skip ahead in the video. And for the Icicle spec, as with all the other specs, we have to ask ourselves, what are the important stats that we want? And for the Icicle spec, those are special attack, anything that increases our magic attack, ice attack, critical damage, mastery, and to a certain extent, it can also be versatility, because it also increases our damage. And of course, luck and crit, our main substats. And starting with the first Imagine that is just free to get, because you will get a box to choose between these 3 Imagines right here. And you should just pick the boar. It increases the special attack and has a decent boost, but it's really nothing quite special. And as with all of the Imagines that I put here, you shouldn't really invest in them for Icicle specifically. Now the next 3 Imagines are the purple luck scaling Imagines, and I'm just going to put them here because the class does build luck, so you have like some synergy, but really I don't think you should ever go for them, at least for Icicle. But if you have them laying around, you can just try them out, I guess, if you like the B or whatever. But really, as with everything else, you should just not go for these at T0. If you want to try them out, they're fine, but don't invest on them. And the Muku Scout is very, very good for a lot of DPS classes. So if you plan to play a lot of other DPS classes, this might be worth investing to, but definitely not for Icicle, because Icicle just can't hit enough, in my opinion, to really make this worth it, and you're just much better off with other options. But if you have this laying around and you really play APM like a god, maybe it's worth it to go for it. Then, getting into the gold Imagines, we have Irona. And Irona is of course not good for your DPS, but at least if you're a healer and you swap from Verdant to Icicle and you just want to play, especially if you have some copies of it, it's going to give you a nice stat boost, and in a raid it will have the use case of just being able to revive some other people if you are able to stay alive on Icicle. But Icicle is very, very squishy, so this is like really, yeah, if you have it and you don't have any other option, you just want to hop in on Icicle, sure, it's fine, but really you should never actively build for this for Icicle. Next up is the Bandit Leader, and while this does boost your own attack and your party's attack, it's just not really that good of an Imagine overall, especially for DPS. There are some use cases for other classes, I think, but you're just foregoing a lot of raw stats just for this one active effect. And it would be maybe okay if you had like a huge burst, because it does provide that active attack buff. But Icicle is more of a consistent DPS with some more highs, some more lows, but really this is like never worth to go for. If you have it laying around, I guess you can use it, but yeah, really don't build this. After that, we have Olvera, and Olvera, she's okay, I guess, just as the same reason as Irona, you get the passive boost, so especially if you have this at higher tiers, higher advancement, she does just give you a lot of raw stats, but the active is just not that important right now, and really the Imagine really unlocks itself at higher tiers, especially at tier 5. So if you're a Giga Whale, I mean, you can try this out, but for your personal damage and overall team contribution, this is not worth it in my opinion, and you're just much better off with other options. But yeah, as with all the other ones, if you have it laying around and you only have like one of the other good Imagines that we're going to get to, this is okay to slot in, or maybe if there's like upcoming content that we don't know about yet, that has a lot of things that you need to AoE, that you need to group, then this can be good. But in that case, like if it's that serious, I think for that content you should just swap to Ray, to be honest, and then swap back to Icicle, in my opinion. After that, we have the Storm Goblin King. And this is an interesting one, and if you're really deep into it and you know all the whaling stuff, this has like some nice interactions, and since we are also a luck scaling class, it can be okay, but you're just not hitting enough, and other things are just way more important than stacking luck, because luck ultimately doesn't provide anything other than enabling your talents for resets, and other Imagines are just way more worth it in my opinion. So it's kind of in the same boat as Muku Scout, where it is like okay, and if you're whaling and you want to try this out, go for some weird builds, maybe with Storm Goblin and like Goblin King, you can do that. Let me know in the comment how it goes, but really 99.99% of players should not go for this for the Icicle. Next up we have Tina. Oh, Tina. Well, it's kind of the same case as with Irona. If you are a healer or a tank especially, because these two more than likely will have Tina than a DPS, you can run it for the passive, and the active is like okay. Especially if you like swap to Icicle, maybe you aren't as geared as other people in your group, and Tina can just help out with that, because you're not gonna be top of the damage anyways, so you can just slot in Tina, I guess, to just support the rest of your team and still do like something, especially again if you have this at higher refinement, higher tier, then it's gonna give you a lot of stat boost. And also if you have like one of the other better Imagines in the game for Icicle, then Tina will also reduce this Imagine's cooldown. So it reduces its own cooldown, but it also reduces other Imagines, other skills, other players' Imagines cooldowns. So that's why Tina is really good. But overall, as with all of the other ones here, you're just foregoing too much of your own personal damage for some team gain. And Tina is a one-off thing. So if two players run it, it just doesn't increase. You can only use one of it in your group. So there's really no point in running more than one. And if you are in a capable group, pushing higher tier content and level content, that especially ones that require min-maxing, most likely your tank or healer will have a Tina. So yeah, it's like okay to slot in, but don't go for it for Icicle, please. And then we have Goblin King. Goblin King, it's okay, because as with other stat buffing gold Imagines, the stats, especially at higher tier, is pretty useful, and you may, depending on the item level, hit some breakpoints for your other stats, where versatility just becomes a pretty decent stat to go for. So this is okay, but the other options are just much better in my opinion. And maybe there are some fringe use cases at higher tiers where this can become useful, but overall, as with all the other ones, going for the best in slot is just always going to be more valuable in 99% of cases, let's say. So yeah. And lastly, we have Vino. And Vino, it is good just as the other ones or some of the other ones for the passive bonus. And just like with Tina, if you don't have it in your group, yeah, it's useful, especially if you have it at a higher tier. It's going to be okay, but you should not go for this for Icicle. But if you're like a beat performer and you already have this, and you're just swapping to Icicle to play some Icicle, and you don't have some of the other Imagines, then yeah, you can just slot it in. And if perhaps like your healer or your tank doesn't have Vino, then it's okay to slot it in. But again, for pushing the end game content, the min-maxing content, you should not be the one running Vino. So. Now lastly, we have the Mook Captain, and I think I want to put this here. It's like kind of one of the more viable ones that you shouldn't go for, just because it provides crit and critical damage. But the other ones that we're going to get to in the S and best in slot tier are just way better to go for, both for free to play and for whale. So with the Imagines, because you can only equip 2, but you can decide which ones you want to go for, there's really no reason to go for this ever, because Muku Chief exists. Okay, now for the Imagines that you should be going for. First, we have the Lizardman Mage. And this guy actually surprised me, because he does provide the ice attack bonus, which of course does make sense to go for, but it surprised me how good it actually is, especially in the early game. Because in the CBT we did some testing, and this guy was actually pumping. So I think this is like a good thing to go for, especially at tier 0 to just have maybe. But I think for the long term, the other Imagines are a bit better. Which brings me to the next purple, and this is going to be the staple of like every single Icicle out there that isn't whaling or like playing for a longer time, is the Goblin Mage. And this is because the Goblin Mage, it gives intellect bonus on both the active and the passive. So it is just really, really good for anything that scales with intelligence. This is also very flexible for some of the other int classes to use. So if you want to do some swapping between classes, this is also really pretty good. And it is just very, very cheap to build. And so the value of this is very, very high, especially if you're not whaling, dolphining, whatever. Because as we'll get to, the best in slot, they are both gold Imagines. So getting 2 of them, and especially getting 2 of them at high refine, is going to be more difficult. So if you aren't whaling, you probably want to run one of the gold Imagines, namely the Muku Chief, with the Goblin Mage, or maybe in some fringe cases or early game the Lizardman Mage. But mostly I think the Goblin Mage is just way superior, because it just scales very, very well. And the Lizardman Mage kind of falls off a bit more the deeper we get into the game, while this just has infinite scaling because your intellect keeps going up, 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 up. Now getting into the best in slot, what are you looking for? And I'm going to start with the Crab. Now the Crab, it gives mastery in the passive and in the active, and it's just a very, very, very strong Imagine for a ton of DPSs if you aren't aware of it already. Mastery is just kind of a stat that is bullshitting you, because instead it should kind of be named attack up, at least for the DPS classes. It is so versatile on so many different DPS classes, and it's just very, very strong. I did testing on the CBT with both Goblin Mage at tier 5 and Crab at tier 0. And Crab, at least on the level 40 gear that we had, of course, Crab has a little bit of an advantage there because of its raw stat capability. But just to put it in perspective for you, the Crab at tier 0 outperformed the Goblin Mage tier 5 in the passive. So when you don't use the active, the Crab was actually better, and only when I popped the active, which of course is kind of important, then the Goblin Mage at tier 5 was slightly better than the Crab at tier 0. But that should put into perspective how strong the Crab can be. And while this is not like the best thing to go for, if you are not whaling or looking to long-term invest in your Icicle, like, then you should be going for the Goblin Mage at tier 5, or just have it while you're building up the Crab. But the Crab is really, really strong and is one of the best in slot Imagines if you are at tier 5 or at least tier 3 on it. And the Crown King, the best Imagine pretty much for every DPS, the Imagine that kind of breaks the game and is perma-farmed on CN on 200 channels. It is the Muku Chief. And the Muku Chief is without a doubt the best Imagine, the most important Imagine right now for Icicle, because not only does it give you a lot of crit on the active, but it just gives you a lot of crit damage for its passive effect. And we are a class that wants intelligence, special attack, of course, ice attack and whatever, but you can't really get that. And we want to stack crit and do critical damage. So this guy is really good. And no matter if you're free to play, if you're a whale, if you're a dolphin, you should always get this at tier 0, at tier 3, at tier 5, whatever it is. Just get this. And while you're free to play, you may need to wait a little and maybe build out your Goblin Mage during that time and run the boar while building out the Goblin Mage and then farming for Muku Chief. Or like maybe you want to try out the Lizard and you can like build out the Goblin Mage and have the Lizard at tier 0, or you want to try the Lizard, that's also like fine, but overall the Goblin Mage is gonna be a better long-term investment. But anyways, you should always be going for this guy just because of how good he is for this class and for a lot of other DPS, including the other spec that we get to for the Frost Mage, the Ray spec. Now before we wrap this up, I want to show you some combinations, because this will be maybe a bit easier to understand if I explain it. So for the whale, we're going to tier 5 all the way for both Imagines. You will want both of these at tier 5. And if you are like not giga whaling, but you're like kind of dolphining or looking for something that is like a bit cheaper, but you're looking for some long-term investment, you will just want to go for Muku Chief on tier 5, while also going for Goblin Mage on tier 5. And once you have Muku Chief on tier 5 with the Goblin Mage, then if you're not yet satisfied, if you still want to invest into Icicle or a lot of other DPS, because crab is very flexible, then you will want to at some point replace the Goblin Mage with the crab, especially if you can get the crab at like, I think tier 3 is going to be for sure the breakpoint, but it may even be better on tier 2. It kind of depends what patches we're also getting in the future, but overall these are just never really bad to go for as a DPS. And even some other classes can even use the crab, or in some cases, if you're like troll whaling on tank, you can use the Muku Chief or something. But yeah, this is pretty much it. So this Lizard Mage is like, okay, it can really work. And if you just want to go for 2 purples, which you shouldn't do, then you can also do this. But overall, you should just always get the Muku Chief in there. And then depending on your investment level, these are like kind of swappable. So this like kind of depends. This is like really good. And this is what you should pick early game. And all the other ones here, you should not invest in at all for the Icicle, but if you have them laying around, I explained all of these already, then they're like fine to slot in, especially with the Muku Chief or like the Goblin Mage or the Crab. Like one of these with one of those is like okay, but really you're foregoing a lot of DPS for your flexibility of the image. And then I just want to quickly get to the bottom here, all the ones that we haven't sorted. You should never equip those on Icicle. Maybe there's like a fringe situation, if you have like a Tata around and nobody else has it, then you could use it, but this is like, just don't for Icicle, don't. Never one of these, never. I hope I made it clear, never. Now for the race spec, the Imagines are a bit different, but you also see a trend here, especially because right now on CN, critical ray is just better to go for than pure haste focused ray spec. So you want to actually be going for crit, and well, let me tell you, some Imagine is pretty good at increasing your crit damage and crit. So as with Icicle, if you're just starting out and you get the free Imagine, the boar is fine to use at tier 0, but you shouldn't invest in it. And the same is like with some of the other stuff. We have Irona again. If you're a healer and you're swapping for some fun, you can use it, but it's going to be useless for actual damage dealing. Same Olvera. Now Olvera is actually a bit worse on Ray than on Icicle, just because on Icicle you don't really want to run Maelstrom. It's gonna lose you one other skill that is way better to use. But on Ray, Maelstrom is actually good to use because of the energy regeneration. So you just have the grouping anyways, and you have very strong AoE. So Olvera is actually quite a bit worse on Ray than on Icicle. Nonetheless, it's bad on both classes to run anyways. And Bandit Leader, same thing. Not really worth going for if you have it for whatever reason, especially at higher refine. I guess you can get some use out of it. Due to Ray being a bit burstier than Icicle, you may get some more use out of it. But yeah, that's just other stuff. Hint. That gives you a lot of burst, but also gives you a lot of passive stats. So yeah. Then yeah, same thing with Tina. Should never run it on a DPS, but if you're a tank, if you're a healer, you have that laying around, like especially at high refine. You're not going to be the main damage healer anyways, because you're just on your ult doing some Ray, some Kamehameha. So you can just use this and boost your other actually top damage dealers. So you can just sit by, watch something on your second monitor while you just let Ray and Tina do the work. Then again, we have the Incubator and Vino. Yeah, it just gives you passive stats. If nobody else uses it, I guess it's like fine, but really do not go for it on Ray. It's not useful. But again, if you are like I guess especially beat performer likes to go for this because of the passive stat increase on top. So if you have that laying around at high refine, go for it. But yeah, you don't want to actually be going for it for this class, this spec. And then we have the Goblin King. Again, it gives versatility. It's like okay to use, and maybe again it has some use at high refinement, high tier if you really go in on it, but mostly you're just going to be better off with using any other Imagine. And yeah, this is just okay, but your damage is gonna hurt a lot. And again, we have the Mock Captain, and while it does provide crit and a critical damage, which is what we kind of want on the Ray right now, the Muku Chief is just way better, and the other combinations are just way better. That this guy, it feels so sad, but he's just rarely worth going for right now because Muku Chief exists and other combinations are just a bit superior. Now jumping into the actual Imagines that you should run on Icicle. The first thing again is the Lizardman Mage. It's just a decent thing to use on something that scales with ice damage. But again, this is like really not worth investing for long term. And as we will soon learn, there are two other purple Imagines that are really good on Ray. So even if you just want to go for purple Imagines, I think I'm actually going to put them here just because otherwise it may be confusing. Because in reality, you should never be going for Lizardman Mage for Ray, because as I said, there are two other purple Imagines. So even if you don't want to go for gold for Ray, you will want two other Imagines. But it's like, I think it's like a decent bit better than the other ones. Unless you're talking like maybe Bandit tier 5 or whatever, then maybe it doesn't compete, but yeah. And next up, we have the Goblin Mage. And again, as I said in the Icicle part, this is just a really, really good Imagine for any int class, because any int class that scales with int, so you will just always get some value out of it. And especially for Frost Mage, the intelligence that you get will actually boost your magic attack by a lot, both in the passive as in the active effect. So since we are a bit more bursty, this might even have like a little bit more use than on the Icicle, because the cooldown is still quite long. Even at tier 5, it's going to be 80 seconds flat without factoring in your talent. So it's more like 72 seconds when you have the talent. And then somebody may have Tina, or there may be like some other interaction in the future. So this is just really, really good overall. And because of that, you can never really go wrong with Goblin Mage on any int class. And this is the same case for Ice Ray. So yeah, Goblin Mage, very, very good, very free to play friendly. Next up, we have the Fish. And the Fish, I'm not really sure where it belongs right now, but it also really depends on which tier we are talking about here. Because at tier 0, I'm pretty sure right now there's no reason to run it. But at tier 5, maybe with some stat combinations, some specific setups, maybe it does have some use. But overall, as we're going to get to, I think other options are just better overall, and also are much more flexible than Fish right now, because Fish really isn't used on a lot of classes. So going for Fish is always like kind of a bit wonky right now, because you can't really use it for a lot of classes, so you're really focusing in on that one class, which in my opinion is like not a good idea. But fish can work, and if you love the fish, I guess you could go for it, but at tier 0 you should not run the fish over the other options in the S and best in slot tier. And now we have our first winner, our first entry into the best in slot tier, and this is going to be the Muku Scout. Now, why is Muku Scout so good for Ray? It's because for the passive you need to do a lot of hits to keep it proccing, and it is basically synergizing very, very well with Ray, because Ray will increase its damage the longer you have it active, and Muku Scout also increases its damage when you proc it a couple of times. So this has very, very good synergy, and it is just the purple to go for Ray and a lot of other DPS classes that do a lot of hits. So you cannot really go wrong with Muku Scout. And well, on CN you will see that Muku Scout is farmed a lot, and it's kind of difficult right now sometimes to find a Muku Scout that is up, which is quite amazing for a purple. So Muku Scout is in very high demand right now for a lot of classes, and for a good reason. Next up in the best in slot tier, and this is the recurring theme, it's going to be the Crab. And again, Crab Mastery. Mastery just increases your damage, it's really good. And especially if you have it at high tiers, high refinement, I believe it's going to beat out Muku Scout. But in this case, it's actually going to be a little bit closer than maybe on some other classes, just because of how good Muku Scout is for Ray. But in my opinion, if you have this again at like higher refinement, it's definitely going to be stronger than the Muku Scout overall, I think. But both are really, really good, and they are really close. And for our winner again in the best in slot tier, this is a recurring theme. It is going to be the Muku Chief. Muku Chief and crit just provides such good scaling right now that, especially if you get it higher up and combine it with a Tina, it's just going to be really, really strong. But even at tier 0, it just provides so much good stuff. And since right now, as of making this video, crit rate is just better, everyone is going for crit that is maining this class on CN. You just want Muku Chief, and you can't be going wrong with that, because Muku Chief is pretty much used across the board on any DPS, and likely in the future, even if we get new classes, I suspect that a lot of them will at least be decent with crit, because crit just feels good as a DPS to crit. So I think they will just design a lot of DPSs in that way, because it just like, it gives you that dopamine. So getting back to the topic, Muku Chief just is really, really good. It gives you a really strong burst window especially, which is why these two are also very, very good to pair, because you just activate both of them at the same time and your stats just go crazy, and you combine that with the Ray, which is kind of bursty, then you just have a very amplified power for a short time, and you just Kamehameha them down, and they are evaporated, and you're done with the game. Easy. Now, as to what you should be going for like different kinds of investment, I would suggest, as of right now, if you are free to play or low spender, you should probably just go for the Muku Chief at tier 0 or whatever you can get, and then you want Muku Scout at tier 5. This will just be a time gate. Purples are very easy to get, and you can just build it naturally. And Muku Chief will just overall, as I said, be a very, very good investment, even long term. So unless you really want to not go for crit and go for some of the other Imagines, you should just invest in this from tier 0. And even if you're free to play, then if you're thinking long term, you should try to just get Muku Chief higher instead of getting other stuff. But if you want to, you can of course get some of the others like at tier 0. But overall, I would suggest getting those two. And if you are whaling in the whale territory, then in my opinion, these both at tier 5 will be very, very strong, as always for a lot of DPSs, just because of how much raw stats they give you and how much burst potential you have. Now for the Dolphin kind of investment, this should actually just stay the same. I would not go Crab unless you have Crab really high, maybe at tier 4, even tier 5 it will beat Muku Scout, but Muku Scout, I think, from what I've seen, is just way too strong on Ray to not go for it. And really, at that point, you should be like thinking, if you are not giga whaling, if you should even go for crab, because this guy is just too good and chief is just too good. So if you don't have chief tier 5, you should just get chief tier 5 before anything. And if you are just starting out, as I said, this will be your free pick. So if you're at the start of the game, I would say go for this, and then either go for Muku Chief when it arrives, or you could go for some Goblin Maging, because Muku Scout I think will not be available early on unless you craft it, which is also possible. If you craft something, then of course you should be going for the Muku Scout, and you can do something like this for the early game combination and focus on the Muku Scout first, before you then exchange the boar for the Muku Chief, and then you will run those 2 Imagines and be very well off. So overall, those are my thoughts on both of these classes. Alright, and here we are at the end again. I hope you enjoyed my yapping and I could inform you about a lot of these choices so that you don't make the wrong one and just know what you should be going for, what is the best setup for your specific spec. And if you liked it, if you enjoyed it, please leave a like, subscribe, because I'm going to put out a lot more videos like this, and I want to make sure that there's no misinfo. I will also be making a Google Sheet and attach it to any of these guides to keep you updated if there's any changes in the best in slot Imagines. So if you're watching this video a couple of weeks, couple of months from now, just check the sheet so that you don't go for a wrong option that isn't the best in slot anymore. And with that out of the way, as always, thank you for watching. Hiro out.